Hello and welcome to the Comic Crush. This is Script and Pencils. This is our comic creator interview show. This is episode 4, as you can see there. Sorry, episode 2, as you can see there. Series 4. I always get that mixed up. Sorry, guys. Today we're going to be joined by John Kamath, who creates and writes the London Horror comic, which is a terrific self-published anthology-style horror book. With stories exclusively set in London. They're gory, creepy, atmospheric, wonderful little tales, all with a kind of sting at the end. And we're going to talk to the gentleman that writes those, John Kamath, in just a moment. Just want to remind you that you can find us on Twitter at The Comic Crush, on Instagram at The Comic Crush, and you can find us on Facebook too. Remember, there's the Patreon there. If you want to support us, you can do that from £2 a month, and that gives you all sorts of kind of extra content, new stuff every month there. And you can join in the conversation here. Drop us a comment once you've seen the video. You've got any questions, you can drop those in. And we can kind of go back to our esteemed creator, who we're going to be talking to in a moment, and ask him to sort of come back and answer those. So yeah, get involved in the conversation. I'd love to hear from you guys. I am your host, Paul, as always, and let's say hello to John Kamath.
Hello,
John.
Paul. Nice to see you. Nice to be here.
It's great to have you here, finally. We've been talking about this for a while. John and I used to see each other quite a lot at Orbital Comics, back when I used to be there, back when Orbital Comics used to exist. And John would come in and do signings for his terrific book every now and then. He always used to bring sweets, which endeared me to him in particular, because
which has led us to this proud moment.
Yeah, it's just, hey, it's amazing what a type of quality street can do, John.
Quite, yeah, indeed. But you mentioned Orbital Comics there, and yeah, those signings were really good. I used to come with my little trolley, my box of comics, do it yourself, and then at the end of the day, once I sold a fair few copies, wheel my wares away to the tune of the Incredible Hulk outro theme. that is the theme for everyone packing up at every convention. Indeed. That is an independent publisher that hasn't been sold out.
I remember your signings always being quite popular, though. You'd get a lot of people in, and they would be really, really enthused. Because I think at the time there weren't a lot of horror comics around, and I think you were doing something really interesting, and still are, obviously. And people I always find it's so strange looking at horror audiences, because I found this going to Fright Fest when I worked for the cinema that they used to do Fright Fest at. The audience would be a complete 180 from what you'd expect. They were the nicest people. and you, John, are in fact
outliers that fit in the conventional stereotype. I wouldn't like to be stuck in a locked room with you. But by and large, you're right. I think horror fans they're very open-minded, and even if something isn't necessarily classed as horror, they're willing to entertain it and see where it goes, basically.
Right.
They have a very open mind. And I think even when I started the book, it wasn't with the idea that I wanted to do something gory and scary and only speak to horror aficionados. Because the book operates on a spectrum of horror, like there are funny tales in there, there's social commentary, we have gory tales in there as well. It was really, the book was looking for an audience member that wanted something a bit different than what they were getting, but also didn't want the same one-note story repeated 4 times in the same issue, that they could they could have a single floppy with 4 different types of horror story in them, and appreciate the spectrum, basically. So, and, you know, you mentioned Fright Fest there as well. I mean, way before I started the book, it also served as a mini inspiration, basically, because you go to the Fright Fest Horror Film Festival, which, you know, for people who don't know, it's the premier horror film festival held here in the UK. And what I always got from going there was just the variety of things that you used to see. Like, there was never one film that was exactly as the same as the last one. And so, although, you know, the films themselves could be of varying quality, you were just introduced to that spectrum of world cinema, you know, world interpretations of horrors, different types of horror, psychological horror, body horror. And I just wanted to bring a little bit more of that spectrum into comics, basically, which in itself would require a reader that was open-minded and up for it.
I mean, they're fascinating little issues, because you, in some ways, you get recognizable elements, but in others, you do get some really lovely surprises. I'm thinking, you know, most recently issue 10, which is right here. Can you refresh my memory as to who did that lovely cover job?
It was a guy called Flops Comics. His name is Alan. He's very popular on Instagram. So if you get him by his tag name, which is Flops Comics,
I follow Flops.
He's been doing like a fair few covers now, mainly for indie. So I think he's done one for Dynamite recently as well. Yeah,
fantastic artist. I really like his stuff, and I do enjoy his sort of commentary on the socials. So you have this wonderful sort of tale with the old guy drinking in the bar at the end. I don't want to give away too much, but also you have this solid bit of kind of satirical comedy with The Devil You Know, drawn by Craig. Am I pronouncing this right? Cermak?
That's right. Yeah.
Who's another terrific artist who stuff I kind of follow online. When you're sitting down to create each issue, do you always go in, before you even start typing, do you always go in with a solid idea of what you're going to do in that issue and the direction you want to take it in? Or is it a discovery process as you sit there? Do you start with a sort of what if and go from there?
It's more a discovery process, if I'm honest. I think when I began my writing career, or in my writing stint in comics, I should say, and I found that I went in or sat down at the keyboard with an idea fully formed, the output I always found was quite mechanistic or quite predictable. It didn't live, basically. And there's this sense in which, if all you're doing is being a stenographer for a pre-existing idea in your head, that once you write the script for that and you hand it to the artist, there's nothing alive or in the moment for him or her to discover about what you've written. And so the end product actually can, while it can be well structured, it can be a little bit lifeless, if that makes sense. So there is something intangible in the creative process that actually makes the final thing jump and live and be exciting, as opposed to, as I say, purely transcripting a predetermined idea with beats and notes that you have all in your head. So the way I start writing most of my stories is usually from a very small seed of an experience that's happened in real life, basically. Or an experience I've had. What I try and do is think, look, how did that experience make me feel? What were my responses to that? You know, and then once I've got like the core emotion behind something, once I've got how I felt about something, I use the writing process to, I guess, as a form of therapy, without getting too deep about things. I use the writing process almost as a way of exploring what my thoughts actually were on the situation. And then I chuck in a few vampires at the end as a twist ending, right? But yeah, I think I like the word you use. You know, the writing process for me is a discovery process for me about how I truly felt on a certain matter that may have happened, or a situation that happened to me personally. That sort of personal energy, that emotional energy, I think lends relevance to what I'm writing. So I don't truly like writing pure fiction. It has to have some meaning, some relevance, some so what for me.
Yeah, I mean, I noticed in the books, the issues that I read, there's a satirical bent, but there's also a kind of strong bent of social justice.
Yeah,
and also I think very much the kind of stuff that you would see, and I mean this respectfully, and because I like, it pleased me to see it, that you would see in the early Hellblazer
yeah,
comics,
very much so.
which I assume you're a fan of. I mean,
yeah.
I mean, also we have the character of Jane Silver who bears a slight resemblance to John Kammath.
There are some hints who inspired her for sure. But yeah, I think the thing is that if I read a story and there isn't something beneath the surface that lends what's happening a resonance, some resonance to it, then it's not going to be as satisfying a read once you hit that kind of final page. I'm mindful though not to make the messaging overt. So I'm not beating the reader over the head with, you know, this is my take on things and things like that. And in that particular issue, you know, there are outcomes that happen for the protagonist and the antagonist, but it's always left in that kind of shade of grey in certain stories. In terms of in that particular issue, how much can the protagonist actually do to affect outcomes? You know, is the real horror with all her power, her wit, her guile. How successful had she been in actually preventing these things happening? You know, she's always there at the end mopping things up, and luckily for her, never has to sit around to ensure that matters stay course corrected. Yeah, there is an undercurrent of social commentary in the books. It's not something that, you know, I would ever want to bring to the foreground, because I think once you do that, you lose the excitement of the, you know, what's going to happen next in this tale. But yeah, I don't think I could write any single story without there being that meaning for me there behind it.
Yeah, okay, that's interesting. And with a character like Jane Silver, I mean, is that a kind of homage to those sorts of supernatural detective characters that we've seen in the past? That's your kind of touchstone? I mean, they look like some familiar touchstones there. Not that I'm saying they're poor directed, but you can definitely see.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoyed reading all those comics growing up. I still crack them open today, and I think the point of departure from what inspired the Jane Silver character and what I bring to the table is the fact that you know, the tales are relatively short, like they're kind of done in one. There's an element of action heavily incorporated into it as well. And like I said, there's a little bit of my worldview, you know, incorporated kind of into that. So what I'm observing, what I'm reading in the news, what I'm seeing happening on the street as well, what I'm experiencing in my personal life, just sort of bringing that to the table, really.
Okay. Where does it start for you? I mean, in terms of your kind of references or from stuff in your life, like books, films. Where did that interest in horror begin for you?
So it's a really good question. I think the interest in horror with me, it sort of began with films, basically. So things like Night of the Living Dead, John Carpenter's The Thing, all the things that you weren't supposed to go near, but your elder brother eventually ended up renting on your behalf from the video store and then just sticking it on of an evening. I think, I think even though I was probably too young to officially watch these things, there was just something about, firstly, the story that gripped me in those films, but also the level of imagination that was brought to the film. And I think with comics, there's a really big opportunity for horror because, you've got an infinite canvas almost. You're not restricted by budgets, prosthetics, CGI, or anything of that. So arguably you can bring, the most fertile type of childlike madness to a concept and really go for it from a visual perspective, while also telling a solid story.
And in terms of sort of control of the panel and the final images, because obviously you got all these great artists coming on and things like that. Do you write long panel descriptions? Are you very precise, or do you prefer to let the artist kind of run riot? And
I think my panel descriptions are very sparse, and when I do write a script, rather than get the artist to recreate a very detailed description or a very specific image, what I instead try to do is get him to understand the mood or the point of that panel in the moment, and then let him bring his weight of interpretation to that. And usually, I think I've gotten better as a script writer, writing a script for an artist, enough for him to be clued in as to what I'm trying to achieve with the page and with the panel, basically. So if I look at a typical page that's got, say, 5 panels in there, each of those panels in my mind when I'm writing them, it has a point, and it's like it has a beat, it has a rhythm that's contributing to the meaning of that sort of entire page. And so I'm able to be much more sparse with my definitions, because I know from the outset this is the effect that I'm trying to achieve with the page, and how these individual panels contribute to that effect. And so you end up, and the artists pick up on that. There's almost something unwritten in the script that you eventually produce that I've noticed that artists are able to pick up on and respond to more than if you were to write very detailed descriptions that you're doing a library scene, and here are a list of all the books, and here are the names of the spines on the cover that I want you to hand draw in there. And that makes the creative process work, where you're working in tandem with the artist to achieve an effect rather than dictate a specific image.
Okay, that's interesting. I mean, do you meet a lot of your artists in person, or is it a case of just contacting them online, saying, "Hey, I like your work, and I've got this. Would you be interested?"
It's absolutely the latter. I don't think I've ever met an artist in person, maybe with the exception of Gustavo, who I met at a convention.
Right.
I've predominantly seen people's work, and when I look at artists' work, what I'm really looking for is how they draw faces. Actually, how they're able to capture expressions, moods, things like that, which are more important to me as a writer. And I reach out to them online. I tell them a little bit about the book, whether they want to work together, if they're free as well. If they've got the time to do it, and if it all works for them. We do a first script together, and if the process of that is enjoyable, and we each of us keep our promises, then I would use them again, basically, or I reach out to them again. But again, I have an eye for kind of the traits that I look for in a good artist. Like, are they a good draftsman? Not are they like drawing like the snazzy pin-up shots and stuff like that, but are they good storytellers, basically?
Yeah.
Do they have an eye? Which is interesting, because whenever you go on Twitter or Instagram, most artists tend to sort of push the splash page or the pin-up shot or the thing like that, and it's always harder as a writer or a publisher to vet, actually, can they tell a good story? Do they have that ability to pace things really well? And I make it easy. I make it easy for my artists to work with me. So in terms of how I work, there are payments made at different stages. So I give them an upfront payment, as a show of good faith. Once they do the thumbnails, for example, I'll make another payment. When they get 50% of the way through the finished pages, I make a milestone payment then. And when they finish the rest of the book, that's when I make the final payment. So, I realize that, it can be difficult for artists to trust people that reach out to them online. And so more as a publisher, the impetus is on me to show that good faith and make it easy for them to work with me.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of key in doing sort of independent self-published books. Can I talk to you a bit more about that side of it, the self-publishing?
Yeah.
What we would term small press, although yours are very kind of polished and very kind of, I would almost say, like an American style comic book, rather than a lot of the stuff in the UK. And that's casting no aspersions on either.
No.
Now, are you at the stage, if I can ask a personal question about money, are you at the stage where it's okay, this turns in enough profit for me to that like the profit from book 10 will fund book 11?
Basically, I mean, I've been going now for, I think, sort of, even I can't remember, must be sort of 15, 16 years now.
Yeah, so since 2006. I'm reading off the little badge on
it's all a blur. I had hair when I started this initiative. That's how much I love comics. I sacrificed my hair for it. When you start making comics, if you're funding it yourself, you are going to make a loss initially, and that's why for many people it's a labor of love. I'm very lucky in the time that I've been publishing one book a year. I've essentially been publishing within my means. I've managed to attract a small but loyal following for the book itself. So that core group of readers that buy me predominantly online and the odd few at conventions means that there's a basis for which I can keep this going as a going concern without dipping too much into my own wallet. Though, in all honesty, I do have a day job, and if I need to go to conventions and whatnot, I can still afford to kind of do that. It's not too much of a stress. But the core funding elements of the book, like the art and the production and the printing, that's all funded from the sales of the book itself, basically.
And sorry, the reason I ask and the reason I dive into that sort of area is just because I think there's not enough out there on the actual financial element of this is what it's going to take to make the book.
Yeah,
this is what you can expect to make, or maybe not, or it's this, it's that. I've never seen a London horror comic Kickstarter And you
no.
is there a reason why you've chosen never to go down that route?
Yeah,
or not to go down that route so far?
I think there are a couple of reasons. I think when I originally started the book, one of the principles that I personally had, and this is a personal choice, is that I didn't want to owe anyone anything. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of like if I succeed or fail, I don't want to have been beholden to anyone for giving me permission to do what I do. I also wanted the freedom of just to publish the stories that I would be interested in reading. So with Kickstarter, there's an element of potentially pre-selling, and there's nothing wrong with this, by the way. It's just, like I said, it's just horses for courses. Pre-selling what you're doing to folks, and again, I didn't know what I was venturing into. Like when I wouldn't be able to run a Kickstarter where I could say, in this next issue, it's going to be this story, and here's a video about all the characters and things like that. I didn't want to constrain myself in advance to, knowing what I was going to put out there before I'd actually put it out, if that made sense. Yeah. I think number two, as well, if the book's a success or if the book's a failure, that's on me. I think to be good at Kickstarter, you have to be super, super good at, running Kickstarters basically, and marketing. And again, when I started the book, I just wanted to write and put out the stories that I felt that I wanted to in the moment. I didn't really want to, have to convince people in advance to take a punt on the book, as a step before the book actually existing. Does that make sense? I don't know if that makes sense.
Totally.
And I think the thing is that with Kicks, I mean, if I did a Kickstarter, then I'd have to spend a lot of my time in advance, on social media, reaching out, hustling, and to do that in advance of actually having a product, it will be quite. A, I don't think I'm very good at it, I'll be honest, and B, I'd find it quite draining, actually. Like I'd be pre-selling something to a bunch of people that I had yet to sit down and decide what that was or what the shape of it was. And so I say all that. I have nothing against people that choose to do Kickstarters. I think it's a great way of, getting funds in, getting your work out there. It's a great way of democratizing what actually gets published, because essentially you go to market and say, this is what I intend to put out there. If you like the sense of what we're putting out there, please back me. That's a great proposition. But again, for me, I didn't want to owe anyone anything. Like I wanted this to be, if I was putting out my vision there, it would be a vision that I believed in, and I backed myself, basically, I think is the best way of describing it.
Look at it. Yeah. That's interesting. That's a fascinating kind of a view on the thing, and especially now seeing so many comics Kickstarters, and also now we're witnessing on Twitter. I don't know if you know, like the sort of negative side of the Kickstarter that seems
what's the negative side of Kickstarter?
Where the money seems to disappear and the product doesn't turn up. I'm not going to name names on this show, but we've I think we're all familiar at the moment with the big quite high profile Kickstarter that seems to have disappeared.
That's part and parcel of it as well. And I guess, look, because I've got that core audience that I've built up over years now, although I put out one book every year or 18 months, I've built up that audience that has become habituated or expects that book to come out once every, and you must know this, from about comic buyers generally. as long as you could put out a book every month, you could put out a book every year, but as long as you hit that cadence, they will remember,
sure.
and they will. Yeah, exactly. It's like, I meet people at conventions, like, once every 18 months, and they really remember the last book. They remember me talking to them. It's like, look, I'm just like some dude that turns up for a convention, once every 18 months. But I struggle to remember my way home at the end of them. And it's a compliment, I think, that you remember that, you remember the stories and you remember to look out for my book,
I've got to say, having seen John in action at signings in the old shop and at conventions, he's one of the most personable creators out there, and genuinely. And the reason I was asking about or talking about earlier, nice, the expectation of the horror audience versus the kind of actuality of them. One of the nicest guys I've met in terms of comics creators and people working in comics, and that's not casting aspersions on anyone else who I've met in comics.
I think there's a realism as a creator. Like, when you start off on the journey of being a comic creator, you can have some very highfalutin visions of yourself being the next Alan Moore writing the next Watchmen. I think where you've then got to bear the burden of lugging 2 boxes of comics on your back. It's like, right, that's the burden of your creativity that's your cross to bear, basically. So car parking at a convention is as high a priority for me as whether people actually like the book or not.
So it's funny, I at the last MCM, well, I'm not sure I actually got to see you because I was just dashing around. I had a couple of hours each morning because I was doing another event in Shoreditch at the same time on the same days. So I was just running around, but I got to talk to. I took a friend, and it was her first MCM experience. And one of the comic creators we met, and I'm not going to say who it is, and again, because I'm not going to say anything mean about them, but just because, just talking about the sort of mundanities of it. He was just talking to us about how he'd had to take this much weight, and he thought he was carrying this much weight to bring over from where he was flying in from, and it's surprising as where your mind goes when you're at a convention, and that's what you end up being preoccupied with. How am I going to get all this stuff home?
How am I going to get it home? And it's like, I'm worried about my lower back. I should have taken the doctor's warnings. Maybe I will try that massage parlor down the road. Maybe I won't leave with my kidney missing, or if I do, I could use it as source material for the next book.
Next book, yeah.
But it's kind of interesting because again, much like the finances of comics, I don't think there's enough out there about it does involve lugging heavy boxes around. Yes, it does involve being personable to the 100th customer that turns up at your booth as enthusiastically as you did the first person of the day. I think a lot of discourse around the comics process is around the magic of creation. And don't get me wrong, it is magical. It is intoxicating. To have like a couple of days writing and getting involved in a script, it's great. But then the reality of, okay, I've got to get this out there. I've got to put this in people's hands, and how that sort of acts as a counterpoint to this wonderful ethereal period of creativity. I think, there's there could definitely be a bit more realism about that on social media. I dare say.
Well, John, there you go. You could lead the way there.
I could lead the way. We could have bench pressing competitions from the small press scene. It's like, how many long boxes can you lift? Like a strongman competition.
It's
so the winner
depressingly
gets spot at MCM or something.
Yeah. For me, it's a depressingly small amount of long boxes now. In fact, I've given up long boxes and moved to short because
you've moved to short boxes, have you?
It's too much dragging those.
In, so I can do those sort of deadlifts with the long boxes still. But again, at the end of a 3-day convention, it's kind of like, oh gosh, why did I think I was so strong?
Yeah. So what conventions can we see you at this year? Do you know already?
Yeah, I'm at Nice. So that's happening this year.
And is that
at Leicester?
Bedford? Nice.
That's in Bedford. Yeah, that's in Bedford. Yeah. There's the Leicester Horror Comic Convention that I'm at. There's the Portsmouth Comic Con. I was at London Film and Comic Con a couple of weeks back. I've put in an application for Thought Bubble, but it sounds as if they're going to need a couple of months to just wade through the enormous amount of applicants.
Always an enormously
900 applicants or something like that.
Wow.
I don't envy them.
Do you know, I've never been to Thought Bubble. I talk about it every time someone brings it. Never been, largely just because the expense of traveling in the UK to sort of further reaches of the UK it is quite frankly extortion. And I think it'd probably be cheaper to fly to the nearest airport than it would be to actually get the train. But I do want to try. I don't think I'll make it this year, but I think it's one of my aims for 2024 to try and go.
It is nice that there's still a convention that puts comics squarely at the forefront of things. Yeah. I think there's a danger that the small press scene overestimates its reach, its appeal, its impact and influence as a byproduct of real estate at MCM or things that aren't exclusively about comics. Because I think the audiences that those conventions that are about film, or about TV, about Lego and everything, arguably people are coming more for that necessarily than they are the comics, I would say. And so it's nice to have a convention like Thought Bubble that A, keeps the focus on comics, but also is something of a flag bearer for the range of works that are being produced in there, which can often get lost or subsumed at conventions that are about things that are other than comics.
Yeah, it's tough now. Looking at one particular convention last year was quite dispiriting in seeing the light. Again, I won't say which because I'm making a negative comment, but it was quite dispiriting to see the lack of comics there, and I think that worries me going forward. As we were talking about in the sort of preamble, we were speaking off air. It's in a very interesting place right now, and I'm not sure when that's going to shift or the direction it's going to shift in. But we'll certainly be covering that on the Comic Crush. For you, just finally, do you ever consider this to be a sort of stepping stone to work with an established publisher, like Image or DC or Marvel or anyone? Is there a hope in yourself that this is what this turns into, or are you just happy doing it for yourself, for the audience that you've got? What are your ambitions, John? If that's not too personal a question.
No, that's easy to answer because the ambitions part of my life is squarely over. I just do this out of hate and spite. I would say that when I started and I printed that first issue, I did see it as somewhat of a calling card to help Vertigo or Image and it being that thing that would do that. But I think the more and more that I've published my own work, the more that I've written my own work, the more that I've sort of established my own audience, the more that that's been, I don't know, there's been less of a need in me for seeking that, because I've got this,
that's interesting,
small little thing that is fulfilling itself and is making me happy. There's not that kind of yearning that then I'll get discovered tomorrow, the Rolls Royce will pull up and I'll I'll be writing Batman. I mean, creatively, I'm fulfilled by what I do. I'm in control, I think, and that's probably a big part of it for me. So I'm in control of what I can put out, when, and to what standard, and that's incredibly important to me as well. It's not to say that I'd ever sort of, turn my nose up at working on mainstream titles, but after since 2006, once you as a creator, develop your own voice, you also develop in tandem with that a natural fond possessiveness of doing that which you do, because it's only you that can do it. And if it wasn't me producing the book, then the book wouldn't exist. And that's reason enough to keep going and where I get satisfaction from.
Right. Okay, that's interesting to hear, because I think there's a lot of creators out there who see it as a jump into kind of the bigger leagues, as it were.
Yeah. I mean, I think the thing is that if you always hope that the work you're producing today is going to lead to something better, it's going to impoverish the satisfaction that you get from actually doing that work. And I think part of what I've learned from being able to do this in the long run is that you have to enjoy what you're doing in the moment. The story that you're working on, well, right now it could be your last one, especially so in the small press scene or the indie scene. So unless you find like joy in doing what you do now and in the moment, then and you're always viewing it as a furtherance for something better, then it will always feel like a poor experience.
Oh, well, that's lovely to hear, John. It's fascinating to hear, and this has been a kind of a chance to actually hear some things you wouldn't normally hear on an interview about comics. And I always think that self-published creators are perhaps a bit more realistic than I guess it's different. Like, other creators have had their certain ambitions met, and everyone's at a different level and a different place in their lives. And I want to thank you for being so open and honest with us about the experience of doing this. The comic, by the way, is fantastic. I read a few issues this week to get clued up on this. Although we kind of stepped away from the actual content of the comic itself. And you can get it at John. Where can we buy?
LondonHorrorComic.com. We post worldwide.
Wow. Okay. Still, I mean, I've stopped posting worldwide, so I commend your bravery.
When I get those orders from Germany and the US, it's like, okay, how many kidneys am I going to have to sell tonight? All right, this could be the one.
Can I ask you, what sort of cost do you do the comic for? What does it cost the average punter to pick up an issue now of this?
Including postage and packaging, it's about £9 each, I think. So if you buy it from amazing. It's about £9 basically.
For a great piece of work with great writing, great art, very polished, very lovingly put together. I think that is an absolute bargain. And I think you guys should run out and get that as soon as you could. I read issue 9 and 10, which I absolutely loved. I love this character of Jane Silver. Just look at that cover. I don't know if you can see that, guys, but that is almost Dan Berenson like style kind of. That's a fantastic cover.
Very talented Faye Dalton.
Yeah, she's wonderful.
She's amazing. She's done a lot of covers, I think, for the Folio Society, who've republished some of the James Bond books. So she did a bunch of illustrations for them. Done a lot of work for Dynamite as well. A really fantastic coverized.
And I love the pulp feel of that as well.
Yes.
Like that is fantastic. I mean, the books do have everything. They've got, drama, sex, horror,
more sex,
push the sex now. But they've got a bit of everything. Comedy. There is, as I said, social commentary, satire. And I really commend your kind of ability to get that stuff in, John, and then get the book out there. And I really look forward to the next one. Do you have a rough idea of when 11 will be? 2024, I assume.
Probably around 2024. I've just begun. I've just begun writing the script for the next one. But it, like I said, part of the freedom of just publishing things yourself is that you can make a decision. Say, well, I'll do a completely different one shot and then do 11, later, basically, depending on whatever takes my fancy. But yeah, at the current schedule, it should be out sort of January next year.
Fantastic. And so, LondonHorrorComic.com to buy this and other issues. Are all issues in stock, like 1 right through to 10?
They're not, no. So I think we go back to issue 8. I think we still got copies of issue 8 there.
Right.
But because it's a small press title, I take the funds from the last issue that I sell through and then use it just to make the next new thing, basically. So once that's a long-winded way of saying once an issue is gone, it's kind of gone forever.
And all the more reason you should grab it while you can.
Until I do my best of compilation at the end of my career.
And these are available digitally as well?
A few, the first 3 issues are available digitally on Apple and the Google Play Store, and I think Comixology as well. Yeah,
fantastic.
I should know these things.
I will put the links. I'll put the links into the description just down there, folks. Remember, we also have our own web shop at the Comic Crush where you can buy recent sets. I try now and do only full sets. Recent runs of hit series. So take a look there. Free postage in the UK only, as I mentioned.
Not you, hands in Germany.
Yeah, I really regret, like, the bloody Brexit. Like, it's so annoying. I had a very small audience in Europe, and
it's not. The reason I've mentioned Germany once or twice is that I think now there are some sort of special like. If you were shipping goods over there under £22, there used to be a waiver. So now even if you're sending like a £5 comic there, it's subject to customs and invoice and tax. And you got to. What's interesting is that you've got to be up to speed on these things as a publisher, basically.
Of course.
It does make you, publishing your own book does make you more worldly aware of how sort of the macroeconomic picture sort of affects what you're putting out there, or if you're able to sell to a particular place.
Yeah, I mean, it killed my audience out there. Anyway, we're not talking about me, we're talking about you. John, where can people keep up with London Horror Comic if they want to?
I'm usually tweeting in the small hours at London Horror on Twitter and at London Horror on Instagram.
Fantastic.
You can find me at LondonHorrorComic.com if you want to pick up any copies of the book.
Fantastic, and hopefully see John at one of the mini cons he's going to. Do drop by his table. As I said, he's a lovely gent to talk to. I always try and make a point when it comes to find John, and
it's nice to see a friendly face.
It's lovely to see a friendly face.
That's not casting aspersions on the thousands of people that stop.
No, not at all.
As well, but it's
it's if you can. That's if you can get near the table, because usually he's kind of surrounded by people. I always find that it's tough for me to go and just sort of shoot the shit with creators, because they're usually surrounded, as they should be, surrounded by paying customers. So John, thanks for letting us take a look at these. That's really wonderful of you. It's lovely to see you as always, and I wish you the very best with issue 10 and indeed 11 when that makes it out. And thanks very much for joining us, and thank you to the audience for joining us. Remember, follow us on at the Comic Crush on Insta and Twitter, and you can find us on Facebook. Our page is the Comic Crush. We're going to say goodbye. John, thank you. Goodbye.
Paul, thanks very much, mate. You take care.